The Martian. This story is about a young Martian called Bob. He is a student of the Martian Banking University. He was travelling to a distant planet when his spacecraft crash-landed in Hanoi late on Sunday evening. Bob woke up after the crash and looked around. Everything was a big mess. The display panel was broken and the emergency escape hatch was already open and could not be closed. He managed to stand up slowly and he cautiously walked over to the door and peeped out. "Where am I?" he said quietly to himself. He looked up and could see some flashing coloured lights and decided that he would take a closer look. It was a sign that had some unusual writing. He could speak English, but this was not like any English he had ever seen. Chukmung Namoy 2010. Bob was very confused. "I must have travelled through time again," he thought. Suddenly he heard voices and he hid quickly behind the sign so that they did not see him. He poked his head out briefly and looked at the couple who were walking by. She is beautiful," Bob thought to himself. Bob went back to his spacecraft and pressed some buttons. A loud beep rang out and then the ship disappeared. "Phew, at least that still works," he said loudly before climbing up onto his broken bed and sleeping. The next morning Bob was woken suddenly by a loud crashing sound. He looked through the window and saw a beautiful girl lying on the floor unconscious. She had not seen his invisible ship and had ridden her motorbike straight into it. He opened the door and reached out to her. He pulled her body inside the ship and gazed at her as she lay there. She looked like a doll. Her skin was flawless and she smelt like roses. Bob was in love at first sight. Then the girl started to move. She opened her eyes and screamed at Bob. His appearance was very different to what she was used to, and he made her feel terrified. He spoke to her in English, and she understood him. She started to feel calm and listened to what he had to say. Bob explained everything to her, and she found every word he spoke interesting. She looked into his big black eyes, and she felt complete trust in his words. The two became immediate friends. The girl introduced herself as Mai. She told him of her family and that her brother was a mechanical engineer and that he may be able to fix the spaceship. Bob was happy to hear her words and looked lovingly at her every movement. Over the next few weeks, Bob and Mai became even closer. Mai disguised Bob with some makeup and clothes and took him around Hanoi. Bob loved the city very much and tried many new things. His favourite was Mum Tom, maybe because he has no nose. Then one afternoon, Mai received a phone call from her brother. "You will not believe this, but I think I've actually done it. I've fixed the ship, and it's working," her brother said excitedly. Mai turned to Bob and told him the news. Bob didn't feel happy though. In fact, he felt sick and wanted to cry. He was in love with Mai, but how could he tell her? Mai and Bob went to her brother's workshop, and the ship looked like new. Bob went inside and looked around. It was true, everything was repaired, and it looked amazing. How could you fix so many things? And they all worked perfectly. Mai walked into the ship and looked around. "Wow, it looks great," she said. The two looked at each other briefly, and then Bob said quietly, "I suppose it's time for me to go." Mai looked a little sad and said, "Yes, I suppose it is." The two looked at each other again. Neither of them knew what to say. Then Mai walked out of the door. She was trying not to cry in front of Bob. Bob just stood there and swallowed hard. He felt like his heart was about to break, but he said nothing and just pressed the button to close the door. He looked out of the window at Mai as the spacecraft slowly lifted from the ground. Bob could see a single tear roll down her little face as he waved goodbye. Mai looked up at the spacecraft and whispered, I wish he had taken me with him, as she watched him fly into the